Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. All right, everyone, we're going to kind of get going here in this podcast. And I wanted to do this podcast really as a short kind of, I guess, summary or, just a list of helpful things that I have learned in the last 10 years of doing a lot of work and research. And particularly in the last 2 years, a lot of my time and my effort and my energy has been put into consulting with a variety of different, teams and staff collections around the U.S., but also in the international world. Kind of just sharing maybe what I think can be applied from the science of strength and conditioning, or workload management, or skill technique, or injury management, all that kind of stuff. And I've been super fortunate that the last 2 years in particular, I've been just spending a lot of time with different NCAA programs, different high-level club programs, and then a lot of different elite programs around the world in the US. And what I can get from that is that it allows me to look across the entire kind of sport and realize what are common problems that a lot of people are struggling with. And so in these conversations, when I talk to either coaches or the medical staff or the strength staff or, the gymnasts themselves, there are some common themes that come up around, the fact that the competitive season is just so brutal still in terms of what is asked of you for competition and training volume. And then you're managing school and you're managing all that kind of stuff. So I realized that I've been talking to a lot of athletes and getting, their feedback that this information is helpful, but I've never done a podcast that kind of summarizes some of the big themes. When I go to a college or something like that, I'll spend an hour or two with their athletes fielding questions, going back and forth. And it really comes from these chunks of these bases of things in season that I think are really, really helpful. And so what I wanted to do is, realizing I've never really delivered a podcast to the athletes themselves, whether we're talking, club athletes or college athletes, NCAA, or elite athletes internationally. We've never really done a podcast where I just share all the things that I'm giving to these programs or giving to these athletes, or when I talk in the clinic, I'm giving to these athletes for recovery and for optimal performance. I've never given those in a podcast before. So I wanted to maybe do this as something in the preseason. Right now is when I'm recording this, it's October. And obviously the preseason's coming up in a month or two, and then we're going full steam into competitive season. So hopefully by sharing these tips, there's kind of 5 big buckets we're going to go through. People can take this, pass it to their team. Everyone can listen to it, have a conversation about it. They can, DM me or ask me questions and I can kind of give a feedback. Maybe we'll do a follow-up if people submit questions that they have after this. I'd love to kind of do this because in reality, I wish that someone had summarized all of this and given me some practical tips on what to do with sleep and stress management and all this kind of stuff. It probably would have made my life a lot better as a college athlete, competing and doing PT school and stuff like that. Because I was pretty miserable my senior year in particular in terms of how much stress I was going under and how much work I had to do and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful. And again, knowing this is geared towards the athletes and the gymnasts, I'm not going to go super research or data heavy. We'll include some stuff in the show notes and in the YouTube comments about what you maybe want to look up for research studies. But a lot of these things I'll mention the authors or I'll mention the books that I think are really helpful for someone to read if they want more. But I don't want to make this like a super dorky dissertation, because someone listening to this podcast is probably more interested in just like what can help me and not, what's the circadian rhythm biology of why this is useful or something like that. So, so starting off, when I talk with people, when I'm with the athletes in particular, I say, many people are doing a lot of the same stuff to increase performance and reduce their injury risk, right? So a lot of people are training hard. A lot of people are doing strength and conditioning. A lot of people are trying to work on skill technique and, meet pressure and mental toughness and kind of, the mental skills they need to perform well. A lot of people are missing out on some basics of recovery and some basics of things they can do outside the gym to maximize those gains or maximize those adaptations. And so the number one thing I think if everybody could try to focus on would be getting 1 more hour of high quality sleep per night. Okay. And there are a lot of things that you can do for that. But the reason, it's easy to say sleep more and try to do it, but I think people don't realize the impact that it has on people's performance and on their longevity and their health. So a couple of really great researchers and books in this area to look at. So Andrew Huberman is probably my go-to person for a lot of optimal performance stuff. But I think episode 2 of his podcast is really all about sleep, and it's all about the mechanisms behind why certain things with sleep are really useful. So I would highly suggest checking out that episode if you want to learn more. But he has also done a really great episode with Matthew Walker, who's another fantastic researcher. Matt Walker has a book called Why We Sleep, which, it also has some really great information around, that book when I read it was equal parts scary and, helpful. But it really does highlight some of the important points around why sleep is important and what happens in sleep. That for me, in order for something to be adopted to my lifestyle and really make sense of it, I have to understand why it matters. So when I learn about why it matters and it resonates with me, I can kind of further understand, okay, this makes sense of why I need to change my lifestyle. But out of all the things that I've tested on myself before I gave to athletes, actually following some of these sleep recommendations truly did move the needle on how I felt, my mental health, my levels of anxiety and kind of sadness, depression, or more importantly, my ability to deal with adversity. So like my patience, my emotional regulation, my ability to be persistent in some of my goals really were directly correlated to the quality and the quantity of sleep that I was getting. And if you look at the research from Matt's book and many other great research studies, there's another book by Keldman and Beckham, I think it is, that's about like recovery and kind of what the performance aspects of sleep and recovery are. But high quality, consistent sleep is really related to power and kind of like mental health significantly. So a couple studies showed that, under, I think it's 5 to 6 hours of sleep per night, the risk of injury elevates like 1.7 in certain subsets of college athletes. And then also there's some studies that show that, the lack of sleep and sleep deprivation correlates to reduced power output. So on jump tests or bike tests or strength out indexes on force plates. So those things you can see are noticeably reduced when somebody's chronically underslept. And then also there's obviously a pretty well-known one about, reduced in focus, you have a reduced ability for energy. You kind of have an increase in the risk of mental health concerns for anxiety and or depression, with the thought process being there is that sleep really helps to restore the frontal part of your brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is really important for executive function and kind of having a check rein on your emotional and your limbic system. So I think a lot of the things that made sense for me was, getting less quality of sleep or not having a sleep routine was negatively impacting those things that really help you think at a high level and have energy and have focus. And those are all things that are directly needed for performance, right? In order to focus for a routine and be really dialed in and manage your emotions and manage your adrenaline, your anxiety, you need some of those things to be available to have positive self-talk and wrangle in some of those more distorted thoughts, which a lot of people struggle with competition anxiety or feeling stressed out with school and how much they have to do. And so if I was a high school athlete in gymnastics or a college NCAA athlete, or, for someone who's an elite gymnast, having these tools under your toolkit to really focus on managing your emotions and staying calm and all these kind of things are crucial. And sleep really is directly related to this. So with that being said, I understand the reality is that people have schoolwork, people have other life commitments that are just outside gymnastics, people are traveling. So I get that it's going to be impossible for someone to just uproot their entire life and go to bed at 9 and wake up at 6 and think it's all going to be great. So I think, let alone maybe trying to get an hour with a sleep routine, as we'll talk about, I think trying to maximize the hours you are asleep is going to be something that's really, really important. So here are some tips from Andrew Huberman, Matt Walker, and many other great research studies that seem to have a pretty big effect on the quality and the quantity of sleep you get. Okay, so sleep is really governed by our natural rhythms of circadian rhythms. So when our body wakes up and goes to sleep, and there are some things that help influence those things staying on cycle. Okay, so the first important one is trying to get consistent sleep, right? So what I mean by that is, during the week, you may wake up for school or for class, say it's 6:30, right? Or 7. And you might be, 7 o'clock, and then you go through your whole day, you go to school, you get food, you go to practice, you come home, you do homework. Maybe you go to bed at 11:30 or 12, right? So every night during the week, you go to bed around 11:30 or 12 and you wake up at 6:30 or 7, right? So that consistent schedule is all throughout the week, but then maybe the weekend comes and, maybe you stay up with some friends and you're doing something, then you sleep until 9. And then the next day you kind of go out and you do stuff and you're up and about, and then you go to bed at like 1 on Saturday, you wake up at like 10 on Sunday. So you can see how the 5 days during the week is very drastically different than the Saturday and the Sunday. And what that does is it interrupts your body's kind of rhythm of when it's used to going to bed and waking up. So if you can try to find some sort of consistency, say maybe it's 11 to 7, every day, or 11 to 6 if you're really pinched for time. That would be ideal to have the same kind of thing. And then on the weekends, trying your best to match that 11 to 7, even if it's kind of a rough wake up on a Sunday or something like that. But like maybe I know you want to sleep in and recover, but trying your best to have some sort of a consistent sleep cycle is really important. And also with that, trying to get 8 hours is ideal, because from their research, a lot of the really important kind of fantastic stuff for recovery and adaptation, that comes in the last REM cycle of about 90 minutes. So all of the really great work that you've done on strength and conditioning, or studying for tests, or going to practice and learning skills and hitting routines, like, and doing really, really hard conditioning, all of those adaptations don't happen while you're doing the thing. Like, a little bit is happening because your body's always kind of trying to catch up. But the majority of that stuff comes from the optimal dosage of work followed by the optimal dosage of rest. So if you work really hard and then you get good food in you and you sleep and you have a good recovery window, that is when your body really does solidify some of the things in your mind that have kind of been like study focuses, or has been tried to really be the exercise focus for like getting stronger or more powerful. That all happens when you sleep and when you recover. So that's why it's really important. And now the second thing that I'll recommend, which was really, really helpful for me, and that was, I was blown away as it was even a thing, is that seeing the sunlight first thing in the morning within about 60 to 90 minutes of waking, and then also seeing the sunset when it's setting, it helps significantly set your circadian rhythm. And so from Andrew Huberman's lab, we have special receptors in our eyes, and some other studies have shown this, that are called melanopsin ganglion receptors that essentially respond to the angle of light reflection that the sun is at. So when the sun is coming up, that angle of light triggers some of your circadian cycles to wake up and get the day going and get your hormonal response going, all that kind of stuff. And then seeing in the evening, seeing that sunlight sunset again is the similar angle. And so you kind of get that signal to wind things down and start going to bed. So that's really helpful. And so the way you can do this is just when you first get up within the hour, try to see sunlight, try to see some sort of bright sunlight outside, go for a 5-10 minute walk. Maybe you're walking to class. Maybe you're walking out just around your campus or your dorm. Maybe you can get outside your house if you're in a high school and just sit on your porch as the sun comes up for 5 minutes while you're hanging out. But seeing that natural light tends to really help. And so now in the mornings, I try to get 5 to 10 minutes of sun exposure, whether I'm walking to my car to go to the gym, or whether I'm just going out for a run or something like that. It does really help to wake you up and get you going. So then seeing the sunset as well. If you live in a really dark area, or you don't have access to sunlight because it's really early when you wake up for 5 or whatever, you can try to get some sort of light exposure from a sun lamp and just get bright light in your eyes. It's not as good as even a cloudy overcast day. There's more UV rays per Andrew Huberman through the overcast. So you still would want to get outside if it's a little bit like, darker out, but you're still seeing sunlight some way. But I do have a sun lamp actually behind my computer here that when it's really dark here in the Northeast, I wake up at like 5 or 6 and it's not going to be sunrise for like 2 more hours. I will sit for 20 minutes or so at my desk, doing some reading or doing some journal work or something like that. And I'll get that bright light in my eyes. And that really has helped me significantly. Seeing the morning and evening sunset is really, really great. So ideally 8 hours, right? That last 90 minutes is really important. You're seeing the morning sunlight, the sunset, if you can, trying to get a consistent sleep schedule, the most that you can. And then also with that in the evening, when you are done, trying to have a dimmer light source, trying to have things that are a little bit more like dim light. It's not super bright lights like fluorescent in your eyes. The same way you need sun when you wake up, or light when you wake up, you want to try to calm that down on the evening. So trying to have either like dim lamps, or kind of like more lamps that are kind of like not as intense on your eyes. You can buy special light bulbs that are a little bit less on the demand for orange or hue light. And Andrew also has suggested like putting your lamps and stuff like that on your floor can be really, really helpful as well, because when the light's above you, again, your brain is kind of signaling that's, a wake up time maybe. So putting those lights on the ground that are maybe orange hue. I personally have a orange hue lamp next to my bed on the ground. So when I, try to get the last 30 minutes of my night, I'm trying to read for 30 minutes with everything. All the lights are down real low, and it's just enough that I can see the pages of my book. And I'll do that for 30 minutes. And I do feel significantly better. I fall asleep really quick when I go through this like kind of nightly routine, and I dim things down and I get off my iPad or my phone or something like that, because that is blue light, right? So you don't want blue light. You definitely don't want anything from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. You don't want any like, computers or phones or iPads or stuff like that. Really don't want it then, but ideally an hour before you before you go to bed, you're shutting those things down. So get off your phone, get off your iPad, get off your computer. I know a lot of college kids and high school kids have to do laptop work, but maybe you can come home and do that laptop work right away and finish with book work or studying or reading PowerPoint notes or something like that. We had an athlete who switched those two things around, and it helped her a lot. So no blue light an hour before bed would be really helpful. Definitely not from 11 p.m. to 5 p.m. I know the reality of college and work is hard, but try to set this the best you can. And then also trying to sleep in a cooler temperature helps out quite a bit. So trying to sleep in about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, it's air conditioner or a fan or windows or something like that. Roommates I know are tough, but it does help your body kind of fall into a more rested state more aggressively. I won't dive into the science of that, but just take that what it is. So the last thing I will say too, a couple of things here. One is trying to limit your food intake about 1 to 2 hours before bed to give your stomach a break and kind of get into digestion mode so that you're not actively trying to digest food while you're asleep. And then for those coffee drinkers like myself, as I'm actually on half calf right now. So half decaf, half regular, as I took a 2-week hiatus and I'm back now. But trying to limit caffeine at 8 to 10 hours before you go to bed is really important. So even like 10 to 12 is probably ideal because the half-life of caffeine to break down in your system comes from that. So caffeine works. I don't want to go too nerdy here, but there's a receptor that essentially adenosine binds to that receptor. And the more it happens naturally, your body gets sleepier as the day goes on. It's kind of the signal for sleep. So caffeine interrupts the binding of that receptor. So it doesn't let that caffeine molecule sits in between the receptor and the molecule. So what happens is it's not that you're avoiding it. It's that it all builds up. And then finally the caffeine wears off and all of that rushes in. That's why you get a crash. So that's kind of the mechanism of caffeine. But to help out with that, and I'll review all these quickly before we move on, is trying your best to not have caffeine the first 60 to 90 minutes when you wake up allows your body to get its natural depletion of that receptor so that you don't have that afternoon crash as bad in the late day. So I'll kind of share the things that I just went over in a list, and you can pick maybe 3 or 4 that are the most helpful. And I'll kind of share what I do to help out with that too, because sleep is very, very important for me in terms of getting like high quality brain function the next day. So 8 hours of sleep, ideally, having that last 90 minutes be really important. So I try to sleep every day from 10 to 6 is my ideal. Seeing the morning sunset and the morning sunrise and the sunset. So I try to get out first thing in the morning. I wake up, I take a cold shower. You don't have to do that, but cold shower and then take a walk around your block or 10 minutes kind of in the sun to get your eyes into bright light. Don't stare at the sun. Don't do anything that would hurt your eyes. But that's very good. A consistent sleep schedule, like I said, trying to get that same kind of 8 hours on every day. Limiting caffeine for the first 60 to 90 minutes when you wake up, and then limiting it kind of after within 12 hours of bed. So I try to have 1 cup of coffee in the morning, but if I'm really busy one day, I'll try to not go any later than 12 to 1. If I have a huge day built up, trying not to drink in the afternoon so I can fall asleep by 10 o'clock. If you are going to drink caffeine, I would really recommend, and some friends have told me this, is to really just go for organic black coffee. Do not go for energy drinks because there's a whole the process of synthetic caffeine, what they use to make synthetic caffeine can sometimes be pretty gnarly. Joe Rogan has a really great episode with somebody who researched like what goes into a cup of coffee. And the process of synthetic, Celsius and Monsters and all that kind of stuff is pretty gnarly on your body. And it's usually got like triple the caffeine synthetically that a cup of coffee would. So try to go for organic black coffee. Try to limit food intake between 1 to 2 hours prior to going to bed. So I try to have my last meal around 6 or 7 so like my body can digest before I go to sleep. Try to sleep in a cooler temperature around 68 degrees. So a fan, I use an air conditioner if it's a hot part of the summer. And then try to have some sort of nightly routine where you're either reading or you're getting off your laptops and your phone, your computer, and you're dimming things around you. Floor light is really good. All of these things, if you were to do even 2 or 3 of these things, particularly like the consistent schedule and seeing the morning sunlight, I think you would notice a substantial difference. So if you're someone who really drags quite a bit and you're kind of frustrated with your energy levels or your lack of, focus and energy and practice, or, you're constantly kind of run down, you feel like you got this constant fog, try these things for 2 weeks. Just commit to 2 weeks of doing it and see if you objectively feel better. And then try to tweak things a little bit. It like I said, it has been substantially helpful for me in terms of performance. I still work out and train pretty hard. I'm obviously doing a lot of academic work. I'm with people all day, trying to have conversations and try to engage, stuff like that. And these things really do make me feel like I'm a better person, to be frank, like mental health wise and physical health wise. So that's kind of the big bucket to start with, is sleep. I spent most of the time on that because I really think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people are missing. It takes quite a bit of discipline and kind of habit building to really get high quality sleep for an extra hour. But I think it's substantially helpful for a lot of people who are out there trying to get elevated performance and reduced injury risk. So again, Andrew Huberman is great. Lots of good stuff in there. If you're curious about that, his podcast is awesome. Matt Walker, great book, Why We Sleep. I would check those kind of things out. So number 2, which I find is the most important, challenging wise for gymnasts, in particular in college athletes that have a lot going on, is stress management, right? And so why is stress management important, right? So stress is actually a good thing. Stress is not a bad thing. Stress, I spent a lot of time studying workload research and our workload system for gymnastics and stress endocrinology and stuff. And the proper dosage of stress is what we have to focus on here, right? So when you have too much stress for too long, that's when you kind of get burnt out, right? But if you never kind of ramped your body up and got stressed out a little bit, you would just be flat all the time. You wouldn't be excited to work out. You wouldn't really focus for, schoolwork. You wouldn't really get excited to hang out with your friends and do things you love. So we really use this analogy about like an aspirin, right? So an aspirin is really helpful for your headache if you have one, if you take the right dosage, right? If you take 0 aspirin, it doesn't help your headache at all. If you take 40 aspirin, you get serious side effects and it hurts your stomach, right? So we have to find that middle dosage of aspirin that helps your headache in the same way that we have to find that middle dosage of workload and stress that helps your body to optimally get loaded, then recover. Like I said, that optimal dosage of load, that optimal dose of recovery, that's how you make progress over time, right? It's called super compensation. So there's 2 kind of halves of our body and the nervous system. We have the sympathetic system, which you maybe know is like that kind of jacked up, doing the work, you're studying, you're focusing, you're taking the test, you're stepping up to do a routine, you're saluting to go on competition mode. That's that really kind of excitable part of the nervous system. It's great. We want that. We want to have the optimal dosage of, being excited and doing stuff. It also comes up a lot with like relationships when you're having a tough conversation with somebody and it kind of spikes your attention, your adrenaline, your focus kind of comes in. You want to be focused. You want to have that adrenaline pump to kind of focus on what's happening in front of you. Everybody knows, asking your boy or girl out on a date or trying to go out for the first time with friends that you don't know. It's a new social situation. You want that, right? You want a little bit of the proper dose of stress. If it tips way too far, you get anxiety, you get problems on the other side, you get fear, right? But you get fear overdose, but at the right dosage, it's perfect to help out with. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic system. That's when you're kind of calm, you're relaxed, you're kind of digesting your food, you're just chilling, you're just letting your body unwind, your mind's taking a break. That's oftentimes when a lot of tissue repair is happening. Your body's digesting the food that it's getting macronutrients from. It's repairing your bones, your tendons, your health. It's making new muscle to make you stronger. Like it's solidifying the things you've been studying. Like that is what's happening when you're in that rest and digest phase. So we need both back and forth. Our body is not really designed to have a chronic low level of stress at all times. It's really designed for a very rapid increase in stress and activity, and then a calm, sharp down, right? So, somebody, the most obvious example is somebody, jumps out at you and they're going to attack you. I don't know. It's a terrible example, right? But you would get really amped up and you would find a way to quickly like deal with it and you run away, right? Like, and then you would, that was terrifying, right? You'd calm down, you'd report it to the police, whatever. But that's what your body's designed for, is that like zink, and it finds the threat and it kind of deals with it and it comes right back down. Our modern society and the way humans have evolved has made it to be a lot more of a chronic low level stress, right? So you're worried about your test coming up. You're worried about your routines coming up. You're worried about some fight you had with somebody in your personal life. You have social media pressures, right? You have all sorts of financial pressures, right? You're constantly worried about this low level stress. That's where things start to get wear and tear, right? And so my favorite researcher here is going to be Robert Sapolsky, who has just so many good books on the human stress system. He has Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, another one called Behave. Just phenomenal papers and research done on the amygdala and some other things around stress regulation. Another fantastic researcher is Bruce McEwen, who passed recently, unfortunately, rest in peace. But he was just a giant in the field of stress neuroendocrinology and the concept of allostatic overload, which is like the wear and tear that stress takes on our system. So if you're a dork like me and you want to go down that world, those concepts of allostasis and all that kind of stuff is where you'll find it. But for the normal people who just want to, learn here, essentially the analogy I use to make this land is a bank account. So we have like a human bank account with stress, right? We have things that will put money into our bank account. So they'll make deposits, right? And we have things that will withdrawals. So we want to kind of keep this in check. And the equivalent analogy is if we overdraw your bank account and you burn the candle too hot for too long, you get burnout, you get fear, you get anxiety, you get a lot of clinical based problems, you get injuries, you get overuse type stuff. So the withdrawals that people have in their daily life that you and I and many of the people deal with are, your tests in school, high school or college. They're your practices, they're your meets, they're your competitions, they're traveling. It's family and friend dynamics and family and friend social interactions. It's relationships, romantic relationships with partners. It's social media. It's all the stuff you have going on every day that you have to like put your energy into. That is withdrawing from the bank account. Now, on the other side, you need things to put money back inside the bank account, right? And this is where it starts to become the life lesson here, which is why stress management and intentionally taking time to do things that you enjoy away from gymnastics, away from school, are crucial for your performance and for your health, right? So having hobbies you love, right? Like I play a lot of board games and card games with my family. I play, Settlers of Catan and like Magic the Gathering with my brother and my dad and my mom, and cribbage and card games. Like it's fun for us to sit around and just like have a few snacks and just joke around a little bit about what's going on and kind of play the games. And it's really, really restorative for all of us. So we do it all the time, right? But also having like your favorite Netflix show or a movie, right? Or some people like to meditate. Some people like to journal. Some people like to go get, brunch with their friends. Some people like to go for walks in nature, right? Everyone has their own thing that really is deeply restorative to them, that really kind of puts the money back in their bank account. So whatever those things are for you, you have to find them, one. Two, you have to consciously schedule them into your daily or your weekly life and allow yourself to have time to do them. And three is you have to not judge yourself and crap on yourself when you take that time and be like, oh my God, I should be working right now. Oh my God, I should be studying right now. I can't believe I'm so like lazy. I'm not doing extra cardio. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm not doing this. I'm not doing my extra prehab, whatever. Like if you schedule your time properly, and you make all the times when you should be working, okay, I'm going to go class, do my homework, go do my prehab, go to practice, come home, another hour of homework, and then, grab my stuff to go to bed. And I'm going to watch TV for 30 minutes, right? Or for an hour, right? And then I'm going to go to bed at 10 or 11 or whatever else it is. That is what needs to happen, right? Because again, back to the concept of sleep helps restore our body, heal our injuries, get our tissue repaired, get our brain kind of back solidified with new information we're learning. This also is extremely important to shift our body into that non-working parasympathetic state and calm yourself down. So if you're working really hard for preseason and tests and midterms and all that kind of stuff, you're grinding, quote unquote, right? You have to have the equal amount of recovery time. Turn the brakes down, right? Relax a little bit, calm down here to really make things go ahead. And obviously, if you're of age and you're in college, you might be going out and drinking or partying or stuff like that on the weekend. And you have to be very self-aware and you have to be very critical about, when are you going out, what times, how often are you going out, how much are you drinking? Because alcohol is extremely imperative to the recovery process, right? But I know as normal humans, we want to have fun. We want to go out in college. We want to enjoy our time. And I'm not saying that I did, of course, but it all has to be in moderation. And you have to think about where you are at in season, because the majority of your building blocks get made now in preseason and off season for the competitive season, particularly championship season. So if you want to be in a really good situation in the beginning of your season, end of your season, it has to come through some of these things being made now. So my tips for this are intentionally plan time to relax and hobbies you love, intentionally plan times where you're grinding and working throughout the day, but don't judge yourself when you take time to go with your family, when you take a day off to go watch a football game, when you watch a couple, binge a couple hours of Netflix because you love a show you've been catching up on, or having brunch with your friends and not really worrying about the clock on a Saturday or something like that. Like that's just crucial for a lot of gymnasts to do, because they're oftentimes very type A, very hardcore, and they want to do the work, but they're struggling to do the rest and the recovery. But the best athletes that I've worked with at the elite and the international and the professional level, they are just as dedicated and just as good at chilling and recovering and kind of bouncing back as they are with the hard work. So this is something that I've had to work very hard at in my professional career, is taking time. I just came off a 3-4 day vacation, but taking time to rest, taking time to recover, and then not judging yourself or talking negatively about yourself when you're doing that in the proper dosage is really, really important. Okay. So number 3, I just have to touch on this area, which is just fueling yourself properly. So nutrition, hydration, all that kind of stuff. I am not the expert in nutrition. I've said this multiple times, but we have so many podcast episodes on this if you want to go deeper. So Christina Anderson, Josh Eldridge, Josh, there's another Josh, I'm forgetting his name. We've had so many great nutritionists on the podcast who have talked about this. Carrie Blair had a great episode too as well. So if you're looking for really nitty gritty stuff like that on what to eat and macros stuff, you should work with a nutritionist. You should work with a registered dietitian to kind of get the best fuel for your performance. Many college athletes have access to these resources and can find it, but it's harder on the club level. It's harder on some of the other individual bases to get those things financially or time-wise. So I can share some of the biggest things that I've taken away from them and that I talk to people about. And the reason this is really important is because back to this whole equation of stress and recovery, what do you think fuels your work and your recovery, right? The fuel in your body is what allows you to practice, allows you to study, allows you to work hard, right? But it also, the fuel after working hard is what replenishes those building blocks and builds new tissue and solidifies your brain working, right? Like your brain runs off carbs, runs off glucose, right? So it needs those healthy forms of carbohydrates to learn things, to operate, to think, to do practices, all that kind of stuff. And then also, gymnastics is primarily a glycolytic sport. So a lot of those carbohydrates are what is being used. So having a proper intake of carbs and fats and proteins Your body gets the fuel it needs, it stores it in muscles, it uses it during practice, then you recover, you get more food in you, and it kind of uses that to rebuild back up for the next day. So you need this for both sides of the equation, for the working side and for the actual recovery side, right? So you're getting the work done, that's burning the fuel, but recovering is kind of putting gas back in the gas tank and rebuilding your body. And the biggest thing that I have heard from nutritionists that I'm going to just echo again, I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian, so what they've told me, the biggest problem with gymnastics is unintentionally under fueling. Okay. And so what that means is that they aren't maliciously trying to, cut weight or look a certain way. They're just generally trying to live their busy life. And because of their busy life, they don't get enough calories or fuel or macronutrients inside of them. And they tend to have problems, whether it's crashing at practice or being really tired after practice or having some sort of lack of recovery. And so they're not intentionally doing it, but they're just running around their busy life, and they have to go to school. They have to go to practice, get a snack. They might have parents that are helping cook for them. They have a dining hall where there's not, so many options all the time. They're trying to figure out what to do, and they just under fuel because they're so busy. And I was like that too. I didn't, think that I was doing something malicious. I was just simply trying to eat, quote unquote, clean, which is a whole different debacle that Christina talks about. But I was just trying to fuel myself when I could. And the reality is that I didn't have education on like what were basic healthy snacks to have with me at all times that wouldn't spoil, I could eat in class, all that kind of stuff. So that is really the biggest issue. Is there's so much noise, man. There's so much noise in nutrition around keto and paleo and juice cleanses and, everything under the sun, just eat lettuce for the rest of your life. Like as an athlete, you need to fuel yourself, right? And so like what you might hear in Cosmo magazine or on social media or your favorite TikTok influencer of what they're doing when they don't work out that much and they're not training 3 to 4 hours per day, they're not studying super hard in between, they're not competing on the weekends, they're not traveling, it's a completely different lifestyle from a person who's not as active at a sport, but also someone who's maybe like an adult and has very different goals of what their life is versus mine. And I'll use myself as a perfect example, right? Like I personally now practice intermittent fasting because it helps me as an adult human think more clear. And I find I have more energy, but I'm only working out 1 hour per day, right? I'm working out like for a long run, or I'm doing some sort of, lifting regimen or something like that. So I would never in a million years recommend that a highly competitive athlete working out 3 to 4 times or 3 to 4 hours per day and is maybe doing stuff on the side or extra strength conditioning around that. I would never recommend they do what I do because it's completely different goals, completely. And so that's an example of something that's very popular right now, but is maybe just like a tough thing to apply because you have a very different sport, right? Very different demand on your body. So the best thing I can give advice here is to work with these professionals and figure out what you want to eat, what are good snacks to have. But just as you time block and you kind of do some scheduling for your work and your scheduling of your practices, you have to intentionally get a ton of stuff on the weekends to build as snacks for the week. Because that was my experience in college and in high school is I typically had meals. I had like a breakfast, I had a lunch that I would build or I would pack or I would buy, and then I had some sort of food that my parents would cook for me after, or in college, we had a dining hall. But those 3 big meals are not the best way to constantly fuel yourself throughout the entire day and have a constant intake of carbs and proteins and fats that you're going to need for practice. And so for me, what I do now is I obviously meal prep for the week, but I also have like every day has like 3 to 4 pre-packed snacks, right? Whether they're like a Cliff Bar for after when I work out and I need a big carb dump, right? Or some sort of trail mix or some sort of fruit or some sort of like, banana or something like that quick. I can have a bunch of stuff that's not going to go bad if I have it in my bag for the day or in the car, and I can eat them throughout the day and not have to worry about these 3 massive meals that I have to eat. So personally for me, if I could go back and do it again, I would stick to my dining hall plan or stick to my 3 meals, but I would try to set either money aside to get from my parents or build it into a meal plan where I would meal prep some snacks on the weekend, whether it's, trail mix or, allergy type stuff that you're fine with. I would do that and have something between each meal to kind of keep the buzzer going a little bit. So I found that was very, very helpful, and trying to have a consistent, well-balanced, preference of foods that works for you is really, really important. So again, I'm not going to go super deep into that fuel side because it's not my area of expertise. But the other note I do want to say is hydration. You should be drinking water all day long, just sipping on a water bottle. And then as you get into practice, it might be a good idea to switch to some sort of, electrolyte and or kind of like mild sugar intake, because your body's burning through so much carbohydrates that you want to have something, whether it's, fruit mid practice or whether it's some sort of, grapes or something that can break down and digest very easily, and get that in there, you want to have maybe like a diluted Gatorade or a coconut water or, some sort of hydration beverage that has sodium and potassium inside of it. And then also has maybe a low level degree of sugar. That's not going to hurt your stomach, obviously, but will just help it go right from your stomach into your bloodstream. And hopefully, if you can have that in the first hour or two of practice, it helps to kind of get in your bloodstream and fuel that up for the second, third, fourth hour. So switching to something like that is very, very important. Coaching and club, everyone's allowed to bring, water, obviously, if they're not spilling it and they're making responsible, but some people would have coconut water. Some people would switch like a half diluted Gatorade through practice, or they would have some sort of like snack, like a couple grapes or some fruit or something like that in the middle of practice. You can't bust out a sandwich and make an entire spread of a charcuterie board, but something light in between practice is really, really helpful. So those three things, in my opinion, are like the foundation, right? It doesn't matter what else I'm going to tell you or all the fancy gimmicks you might hear. And this is coming from a physical therapy therapist who prescribes, foam rolling, soft tissue work, Normatex, all that kind of stuff. Like, those four things technically are the most important. So I would try to optimize those first before these next ones. So fourth is going to be a strength. So strength conditioning is really the foundation of all the fun stuff in gymnastics, right? So if you want to hit routines, you want to do bigger skills, you want to, be more competitive, you have to have more power, right? And more cardiovascular endurance. That really is the foundation of gymnastics, is that bursted power, that explosive body weight power. So power is really a equation of strength and time. It's a manipulation of strength and time. So if you want to increase your power, you have to increase your strength or reduce the time in which you express that strength, so you can hit the equipment harder. You can, hit the board harder for your Chanko. You can tap harder on high bar for a Kovacs or something like that. So if increasing power comes down to increasing strength or reducing time, well, the best evidence way to increase strength is a combination of body weight and weight training, plus optimizing your technique, right? So if you want to increase your strength, we have to do our body weight conditioning, but we also have to do resistance training. We have to do overload training, because that's what's going to take the really big type 2 muscle fibers that really put out a lot of power. It's going to build them up to express more power, right? By having more raw strength to put into the equipment or tumble or tap harder or stuff like that. So by doing body weight and strength training together with resistance training or weight training, plus having really good technique of how to tap and how to shape change and how to like do all the round off progressions you need, that is what's going to help out a lot with your power. So then if we want to reduce the time in which we express that power, we want to work on speed and plyometrics, right? We want to work on those body weight shaping changes to go really fast with good technique, but we also want to work on specific weight training, strength conditioning, or sports performance exercises that express that power really, really hard. So med ball slams, med ball throws, seated dumbbell jumps, broad jumps, sled sprints, right? Those, again, it's an opportunity for a safe setting where you can express your power. If I just said, hey, tumble as hard as you possibly can into a double back, and you haven't really done that in the preseason, it's a little bit sketchy, right? You don't want to go super hard and over rotate or lose control. You have to do that technically over time, but it's really hard to hurt yourself on a med ball slam when it's properly coached and dosed, right? Or a sled push or broad jumps or seated dumbbell jumps. So you can express maximal power in a safe setting by using a strength base and then getting stronger. So the reason I say all this is because gymnastics is still very nervous about doing strength training and doing weight training in particular. But in the preseason right now, when this is coming out, hopefully if you hear this episode, when I look at programs, and I mean this in the least egotistical way, I've been able to look at probably the top 20 NCAA programs around that area, and a lot of other programs, a lot of college programs, a lot of elite programs, a lot of club programs. I've looked at so many strength programs to help them understand why change is needed around this topic. And I can tell you for a fact that they're either completely missing the boat on some of the resistance benefits, or they're doing a very imbalanced program, right? So I'm a huge fan of rope climbs and leg lifts and all of the stuff, handstands, bar training, beam work, calf work, men's ring strength. Like, I will never not recommend that to happen daily. But in the preseason, the teams that are committed to doing external weight training and having a holistic program built into their program, maybe 3 days, 2 days of gymnastic specific training, 2 days of weight training, and 1 day of general work, or if you're younger and compulsory in club, 1 day of some general resistance training, 1 day of gymnastic specific training, and then kind of a third day of the basic shaping, the cardio work, all that kind of stuff. When you have a balanced program in the preseason, you maximize the strength gains, you maximize the power gains, you maximize the plyometric gains, right? That's what sets you up to be really successful for your routines come preseason and come in season. So the teams that are the most successful in college setting next for regionals or for championships in March and April, the teams that last and don't have just like, people in shambles with injuries and have barely people to put up, they're the ones that are willing to put in the work way ahead of time in June and July and August in their strength training work. And then in the preseason right now, they're also still grinding really hard on the general programming, not just the gymnastic specific stuff. So it's really tough to do that. But if you want to have a really good state meet and a really good regional meet and a really good national meet or elite qualifier for your competitive season, the best time to do it was the summer. But the next best time to really maximize some of this is right now, in September, October, November, going into the preseason. So I really can't stress enough how important this is for gymnastics culture. And I really believe gold standard, the hill that I'll die on, is in 5 to 10 years. This will be a hybrid model, will be adopted everywhere. Everyone will weight train in the off season. Everyone will do some of that starting at the age of like 10, 12, somewhere in there, and it will happen. So my recommendations for things that are commonly missed on the weight training side are going to be direct glute training. So exercises like single leg weighted hip lifts or side plank clamshells or sideways sled drags, direct upper back training or scapular training for face pulls and feet elevated rows and renegade rows. We have plenty of videos on YouTube to check these out. And then direct ankle work. So seated calf raises, tiptoe walks, wall lean shin lifts for the shins, this thing called the tib bar. You can put some weight on, you can work on some anterior tib stabilization and strength. Like just some of the grunt work, you know what I mean, is missed. For men in particular, rotator cuff strengthening, so dumbbell, harder weight, harder exercises, side lying dumbbell, prone T's, prone Y's, prone U's, standing full cans, like actual load. Those things need to be built into the preseason training to maximize the power, to maximize the explosiveness that we want out of tumbling passes and high bar dismounts and jumping harder on the trampoline for higher bounce flight time, or rhythmic gymnastics for bigger jumps to have more leaps expressed. Like that is really what is needed. So I'm a huge proponent of talking with gymnasts for buy-in for this, but then also I spend a lot of time talking with strength conditioning staffs at NCAA college gymnastics programs, or strength conditioning coaches that are working with elite developmental gymnasts, kind of an off training 1 day per week model. I have so much time I spend working with these people, and we all agree on it that it's something that's got to keep getting worked really, really hard in the culture. So that would be the fourth thing that I could recommend. And then fifth, lastly, just to wrap it up, which is more commonly known on, but it's just soft tissue care and flexibility maintenance, right? So as season goes on, you tend to get more tight and tired, right? So my boss, Mike Ronald, with the MLB folks, looked at, what does pitching do to your arm? Over the multiple bouts of high intensity pitching, you tend to get really stiff in your lat, your teres major, your pec muscles get really tight. And if that continues to get more and more far gone, and you don't do soft tissue care and regular flexibility work or all that recovery work to maintain that soft tissue integrity, you can lose overhead elevation, and that might increase the risk of shoulder pain, but also elbow pain in a thrower's elbow. So we've done some internal data where we've had college gymnasts come in and measured them before season. And then we say, okay, go off to your college, do your thing, come back. And in May, we'll measure you again. We measured their shoulder and hip flexibility, their ankle flexibility, as well as their strength and their power on force plates and a whole bunch of other things that we did with med ball throws. And what we found in the majority of athletes is that they tend to lose shoulder and hip mobility, and their power and their strength went down over the course of a natural gymnastics season. Very small study, only 7 to 8 people, super internal. But I've also seen this happen with JO club gymnasts that I work with, or developmental gymnasts that go from pre to post college, pre or post season. And they too have issues with just slow stiffness accumulating in their shoulders, particularly if they're a bar specialist, their shoulders get real tight. If they're really good at rings, they're really good at parallel bars and high bar. The soft tissue of their shoulders, their lats, their teres major, their pecs get stiffer. And if they're a little bit more of a lower body dominated gymnast, so floor, vault, maybe balance beam for women's gymnastics, it's the adductors, it's the hip flexors, it's all that kind of stuff. So proactively really trying to stay ahead of the soft tissue care is really, really important. What does that look like? Every day, dynamic warm-ups and proper soft tissue care with stretching before practice, trying to do some foam rolling and specific stretching for the areas that maybe you're really limited on. But also some really good ways to do this are loaded eccentrics. And I've kind of talked extensively about this, but eccentrics are a great way to actually hopefully lengthen muscles in an elongated position when they're contracting, versus like foam rolling, manual therapy, all that kind of stuff is probably just reducing tone or desensitizing muscles over time along with stretching. But loaded eccentrics are fantastic to really help actually lengthen up. So maybe doing 2 to 3 sets of 5 repetitions of these exercises with a 5-second lower and a 5-second hold using load every day can help to really maximize some of that soft tissue quality, right? So foam rolling, soft tissue work. I personally do manual therapy on people in season, 15 minutes every couple of weeks or every week to try to maintain some of these things and help them write a program. But for your shoulders and for your lats, you could do some chin-up lowers with a dumbbell between your feet. For hip flexors and groin, you could do some rear foot elevated split squats or some split sliders between blocks, 5-second lower, 5-second hold for splits. Hamstrings, you could do some Romanian deadlifts and then some sliders as well. Just some loaded kickstand RDLs to get the hamstrings to lengthen. And then maybe for your groin, you could do some like sideways squats or Cossack squats and some middle split sliders slowly going out. You could do those every day to try to work on your flexibility and your soft tissue care in season, preseason and in season. And that would probably help out quite a bit. So yeah, I didn't want to make this episode super long, so I'm going to cut it here around 45 minutes. But I hope that by just sharing some of the things that I see across many programs that I see help a lot of people with their recovery and their performance, you can really get a lot of information to help there. So maybe go back and listen to your favorite section. We'll timestamp this on YouTube. We'll also timestamp some of the things in the show notes for the podcast. But the summary here is that we're trying to really focus on sleep. Okay, we're trying to really get a lot of high quality sleep with consistent schedules, seeing the sunlight, sunset, having the same 8 hours every night is really good. Trying to limit caffeine within 12 hours of going to bed. Trying to have just coffee, organic black coffee. Try to limit your food intake a couple hours before bed. Sleep maybe at a colder temperature at 68 degrees. Do a nightly routine where you dim those lights, you get things to calm down, do book work, and try to get off your iPad, computer, phone, stuff like that 1 hour before bed. Stress management was number 2. So making sure we know that stress is not inherently a bad thing, but it's all about the dosage. So trying our best to find things that restore us and kind of let our body heal. Obviously, sleep is really important, but things like, hobbies you love and kind of finding time in your day to do something you enjoy or hang out with your friends or do something that keeps your brain off of school and off of gymnastics, go on a family vacation, hang out with your friend who's not in gymnastics, whatever. Build those things into your week because it really is deeply restorative. And then more importantly, don't judge yourself or be cruel to yourself when you do take that time. Reframe it as this is boosting my performance with recovery, not I'm lazy or I'm taking time and I should be working harder or something like that. 3 was fuel. Trying to make sure you're constantly fueling yourself throughout the day. We have that unintentional underfueling sometimes happens. So high quality ingredients, macronutrients, work with nutritionists, work with dietitians to get a plan that works for you and your preferences and your allergies or whatever. But trying to intentionally plan snacks throughout the week with a meal prep and trying to make sure you have stuff throughout the day to work constant fuel in the gas tank and then recover yourself after practice. Okay. 4th with strength conditioning, trying to add in external weight training and external power work in the preseason is really, really helpful, along with all of your gymnastic stuff, your handstands, your rope climbs, all that. Trying to build in those areas that we talked about, those exercises that are oftentimes not worked in gymnastics. And then lastly was soft tissue care, which was as the season goes on, you're probably going to naturally lose flexibility and get a little bit loss in strength, even if you're healthy and not injured. That's just the demand of gymnastics season in general. So trying to proactively do soft tissue care via foam rolling and stretching, maybe some manual therapy, but loaded eccentrics are a fantastic way, active flexibility, a fantastic way to do that. So yeah, try to keep it around 45 minutes, but I would really love to hear people's feedback about this episode. Like I'd actually love to hear what they think is helpful. I'd also love to gather a lot of questions and answers here and try to do a follow-up. Maybe we can, put up an Instagram survey poll or people can DM me and talk about what they liked, what they didn't like, and what questions they have as follow-ups. I can accumulate all the questions from the college athletes, the club athletes, maybe the coaches or the strength coaches or whoever's working with these athletes, and maybe come through a second wave here of really specific question and answer, because I think this is going to be very helpful. And I wish I had this information when I was competing in college and high school. So we'll do a follow-up episode after. But for now, I hope that was useful. And I will see you all on the next episode. Take care.